Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome to IPC Masterclass Season 2 and Session 2. And we have pleasure of having Dr. Mustafa Afzal, who is also the General Secretary of Infection Control Academy of India. And of course, we have the President of IFCAI, Dr. Ranga Reddy. So I straight going to the session now. Request Dr. Ranga Reddy to chair the session today and start the proceedings, please.
Thank you, Mr. Pranav. Namaste, Adab, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Colleagues, I am very, very happy to welcome you all to the second session of the second season of our IPC Masterclass. And this series is called as Biosafety. For those who have not actually participated the first session of this series, let me give a little brief on why and how we have planned this series. The main objective of the IPC Masterclass Biosafety is to lower the risk of exposure at all stages in the healthcare system, where biological agents may present a risk to all of us. So, as we all know that biosafety and biosecurity are the fundamental elements of effective laboratory services and also the public health systems in order to prevent the infectious disease. But despite of that, we find a lot of lacunae in terms of the preparedness, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of actually the human resources who are supposed to be handling these issues. To fill that lacunae or the gap, Infection Control Academy, along with University of Hyderabad, with support of academic grant from Healthcare, which is the largest manufacturer of disinfectants and antiseptics, has brought this series for all the people across the world. Uh, you know, as we discussed earlier, in order to improve sustainable laboratory practices and also to increase biorisk management skills and competencies among those working with infectious diseases, we definitely need to have not one class but several classes, encompassing the whole gamma of issues which are uh, supposed to be dealing with the various issues in regard to the biosafety. All the webinars, which are 5 in number, are based on countries and also the world's current and future biosafety needs. During these 5 lecture series, we would be taking the key policies, standards, and guidelines that control and inform the management of biological risks. And we are going to discuss them in detail and also bring to the fore those best practices which are required in order to make our healthcare system safer. And the topics, they are 5 in number, has been mentioned. The last session, which was taken by Dr. Aruna Pujari, she in detail has taken us introducing the concept of biosafety and its applications and importance in the sphere of medicine. And today's class is going to be equally interesting. And today we are going to talk about the classification of organisms and relevant biosafety precautions with levels of biosafety. So today I have the pleasure of introducing my friend, colleague, and also my General Secretary in Infection Control Academy of India, Dr. Mustafa Afzal. Dr. Mustafa, a very warm welcome to you, and it is, as usual, my pleasure to, deliver together some of these topics. Dr. Mustafa is currently working as the Chief Microbiologist in Care Group of Hospitals in Nampally, and he is the lead assessor for both NABH and NABL, and he is one of the pioneers in introducing the infection prevention and control training programs in probably South India or maybe in India. We had the pleasure, along with Dr. Mustafa, to run almost 8 national events in infection prevention and control. And his enthusiasm and also his knowledge in infection prevention and control is second to none. And with this brief, I would like to welcome him and also welcome all those colleagues from Australia to United States who are today very enthusiastically participating in today's session. Dr. Mustafa, over to you.
Sir, good afternoon. Thank you so much, sir, Dr. Rangareddy, sir. Being a part of the Infection Control Academy of India along with you and other team members is really a great thing which I had in my life. I still remember those days, which along with you we used to plan so many things related to the programs and the academic sections in the corporate hospitals and the universities. Without you, to be honest, it was very difficult for me also to formulate the idea, sir. It was both mine and your ideas and some of our colleagues which have put the Infection Control Academy into this position now. I'm very happy to be a part of this society, and I'm very thankful again for giving me an opportunity to talk on a very important topic of the classification of organisms and the relevant biosafety precautions. To be honest, if you see some time back, like when we have started these programs, almost a decade back, when we used to talk about infection prevention and control, the people used to see us in a very different way. They used to ask us, "Okay, is it a different part? Like, is it need to be done so separately? And so we need to give so much time to learn about this." They used to think that whatever has been done and practiced in the medicine so far is the best. But within a short span of time, I think whole world, not only our country, whole world they have now know the importance of infection prevention and control. The pandemic, which we are now saying, it's the worst scenarios I think we have seen in our life, and we don't know how much and how far this disaster is going to be there with us. To begin with this topic of the classification of organisms and relevant biosafety precautions, the first, if you see the slide first, the event of the September 11th, 2001 and the anthrax attacks in the October of that year, it has reshaped and totally rechanged the concept of the laboratories and the biological laboratories and the clinical laboratories in the world. Not only there was been several attacks of the bioterrorism in the past as well, but no one has given much importance to that. We were at a level just to develop an epidemiologist and nodal officers to report these things. But to be honest, still our country is not having a very good containment laboratories in most of the places. We could able to have only in few of the big cities in the country, but I think in the near future, the importance of these containment laboratories and the training of the workers and the development of the infrastructure and also the protocols we develop for the biological laboratories will be an important aspect, important task which the nation has to see in the future. If you see the brief history of the biosafety, the first unofficial meeting was held on April 18th, 1955, and then in 1957 there was a role of safety in the biological warfare effort was discussed, and subsequently from that time, the 1964 and 1965 National Institute of Health and Center for Disease Control, they have done a number of meetings, and they have developed in 1973 along with the OSHA regulations. They could able to analyze and debate on the importance of the association with the biosafety and biosecurity meetings. In 1974, the United States Postal Services and the Department of Transportation, they introduced a regulation for shipping of etiological agents, main agents, which could be a source of threat or a community spread in the country. And in the survey of, again, this Association for Biosecurity, in the meeting in the 1980, they have increased focus on the individual agents, and they have classified both the bacterial, viral, and the parasitic agents, which could be a source for terrorism, or it could be a source for pandemics or epidemics or endemics in the country. And again in 1984, the first edition of the guidebook called Biosafety in Microbiology and Biomedical Laboratories was developed, and it was, you believe me, it has run almost in a decade without any small minor changes. But subsequently, only in 2016, again, the World Health Organization have developed the laboratory biosafety manual revisions, where they have done revisions on the biosafety advisory group they made and the meetings, and special focus was given on the revision of the biosafety manual, because they have felt that the biosafety manual has to be upgraded now and the containment facilities has to be upgraded, because as we are progressing, we are seeing the emerging of bacterial and re-emerging of viral infections as well. So again, this has become a primary task and primary objective for them to develop a proper upgraded biosafety manual. Again, in this WHO laboratory biosafety manual, they have been revised and reviewed and redefined with the main concept of they have classified the microorganisms into risk group 1 to 4. As we go on to the subsequent slides, I will discuss in detail about the risk group organisms and the different level of biosafety level precautions we need to follow at the different risk groups. And again, the emergence of the recent Ebola virus, the Nipah virus in Kerala, and now the pandemic with the corona, these are all pointing the world towards the develop a very good surveillance and very good containment laboratories, so that immediate actions can be taken even in the future if any emerging or re-emergent viral infection comes, so that this much pandemic and disaster can be avoided and can be prevented. Again, they have focused on risk-based approach, evidence-based biosafety approach, and clear needs to define the core requirements for this. The laboratory acquired emerging virus infections, if you see in the net, there are n number of microorganisms where we can come across infections which can occur through the laboratories. To be honest, like in the work which we do in our laboratories, we have come across the laboratory acquired infections due to hepatitis B and the tuberculosis, and very few of them in the nursing side, they have developed percutaneous injuries and they have developed subsequently retrovirus and all. Now the labs have been handled, they are doing both the diagnostic and the viral propagation and the culture works at the laboratories of the different viruses and the bacteria. And because of this, I think it is a dire need to redefine our work, redefine our the classification of microorganisms, and redefine the containment levels. If you see here, the number of viruses are there: HIV and severe acute respiratory syndrome, Marburg, dengue, vaccinia, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, Western equine encephalitis. Ebola was a recent, again it was an issue. Zika virus was an issue recent. And the last but not the least is the genetic modification of emerging viruses. I think this is again, it is a gray area to be again focused in near future, because the genetic modifications of these emerging viruses have been taken place in various places to learn their viral, the molecular pathogenicity and to develop some viruses and all. I think this is another area which has to be studied in detail. So what's the commonest mode of transmission of infections in the healthcare workers working in the biosafety laboratory? If you see here, the airborne is the 84%, percutaneous inoculation during work in the laboratories is the 16%, and the inhalation of infectious droplets with SARS, MERS-CoV, and the coronavirus, and many viruses are there. So the main transmission of infection which occurs in the laboratories is through the respiratory route, and it is this place where the biosafety level containment differs from those pathogens which has been processed in the laboratory, which are non-pathogenic and which cannot be spread through the airborne and the droplets. This is why there was a need for the laboratories to be classified into BSL level 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is again the slides where we have the genetically modified pathogens, viruses, and the real viruses. Based on their, we have to decide the containment or the type of the biological thing they carry and the what type of physical containment we require. Based on this, our containment area will be defined whether this particular organism requires biosafety level 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you see, there are various classifications. When sir has asked me to present on this, I've gone through the net. There are 2 or 3 classifications which we have come across where they have classified the organisms based on their ability to infect the animals and the humans. If you see the United States Public Health Service classification of etiological agents on the basis of hazard, it has been classified into class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. The class 1 are those where you have no or most minimal hazard, and the class 2 we have ordinarily potential hazard, including those that may produce a disease of varying degrees and severity. And class 3 we have a special hazard to the laboratory workers, which could be it proven to be a lethal and toxic to the worker. And the class 4, we have an extremely hazardous agents which can affect the laboratory workers. The risk group classification, which has been done by WHO, if you see that the risk group agents have been classified as RG1, RG2, RG3, and RG4. Again, if you see in the RG1, it is not associated with the disease in healthy adults, humans, or animals. These are the risk group where like non-pathogenic E. coli and the medical graduations and postgraduate students have been given to study. RG2 are those which carries an infection of severity, and rarely it could be lethal. But the good part when we are dealing with the biological agents which falls in the risk group 2 is the most of the time immune system will help us in controlling the infection, and the preventive aspect like having immunization or the therapeutic intervention will totally cure the disease. Whereas if we see in the risk group 3 agents, these are associated with the serious or lethal human diseases and for which preventive and therapeutic intervention may be available. But the consequences of getting infected may end up in having a lethal or life-threatening complications. So this group comes in high individual risk but low community risk. And this group 4 agents are those which are associated with lethal human diseases and where prevention and therapeutic interventions are not usually available, and it falls in high individual and high community risk. So this is how the risk group organisms have been divided based on their impact on the animals and the human beings. If you see the next slide, the risk group classification, they have done on the following factors they have taken into consideration: the pathogenicity of the organism, the virulence of the organism, the mode of the transmission, how it is transferred, whether it's through airborne or through a droplet or through a percutaneous inoculation, and the availability of effective preventive measures like vaccinations and the effective treatment. These are the factors which have been taken care when they have done the classification of the biological agents which falls in WHO. So this is how it goes. The WHO classification of infective microorganisms: no or very low individual and community risk falls in risk group 1, moderate individual risk, low community risk falls in the risk group 2, and risk group 3 they falls in high individual risk and low community risk, and risk group 4 comes in high individual and community risk. This is how the organisms have been classified. Coming to the European classification of the pathogens, again, there was a group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. Overall, if you see, the concept was same behind the European community classification of organisms. So we have seen the United States classification, WHO classification, and the risk high risk group organisms, and also we have seen the European community for the classification of the pathogens. The biosafety, why we need the biosafety for the containment of all these things. So as we see in the subsequent slides, we'll see what is the differences between these different biosafety levels and why it is important. So coming to the cabinets, it is a safety device used to provide the containment of infectious droplets or aerosols generated by manipulative processes. Most of the time we come across in the laboratory where the BSL-2 lab will be there, but they might be performing the process which may generate droplets or that may generate aerosols. So this is strongly contraindicated, and this type of BSL labs where do this type of procedures, especially viral propagation, viral cultures, centrifugations, which and opening of the vials, all this has to be done in the biosafety cabinet where the chances that the aerosol or droplet procedures can be generated. This is how the biosafety level goes. As seen the slide, again it is taken from WHO, from biosafety level 1, the low risk microbes, to biosafety level 4 with a high risk microbes. The biosafety level 1, if you see how now coming to this laboratories, biosafety level laboratory 1, it represents a minimal containment level, which relies only on standard microbiological practices. Like these are the labs where just now I told it has been built up in the medical colleges for training of the graduates, medical graduates and all, and where they deal with pathogenic microorganisms. BSL-2 is for the laboratories that handle emerging viruses and requiring containment level 2. Like we have come across HIV, dengue virus and rabies, where they do the diagnostic test. Again, it is not again the culture work. If you see about again the seeing of the culture work for these emerging viruses, again it has to be shifted into the biosafety cabinet type 2A and all in the biosafety level 3 lab. I am going to discuss in detail about the different biosafety cabinets as well in the subsequent. So this is for the biosafety level 2, where the containment has to, we deal with the emerging viruses. If you see the biosafety level 3, it applies to the laboratory activities involving emerging viruses requiring containment level 3, typically for those which has a potential for respiratory transmission with a low infectious dose. Like these are all the fatal illnesses like SARS, severe acute respiratory virus, coronavirus syndrome, and human pathogenic Asian avian influenza viruses H5N1, Japanese encephalitis, West Nile virus. These are the difference between the BSL level 3 laboratory and BSL level 2 is that here there are chances of respiratory transmission into the community is very high. So it has to be done in BSL. Coming to the BSL-4, it is a maximum containment level which can achieve, and it is designed to be used for manipulating emerging and re-emerging with the highest level of risk. As we have discussed just in the initially before we start the time of starting the presentation, some of the virulent viruses like Ebola, Marburg, Congo Crimean hemorrhagic virus, and Lassa, Hendra, and these are all the viruses which are very toxic, the Nipah and all, has to be dealt in the biosafety level 4 laboratories. So coming in detail now, we'll see one by one what it requires for the biosafety level 1. As we have discussed just now, BSL level is for the risk group 1 organisms which are non-pathogenic and not known to cause any diseases. And every time when we see the BSL level laboratories, we will discuss about these 4 points. What type of standard microbiological practices it needs, what special practices is it required, and what are the safety equipment's primary barriers and the laboratory facilities secondary barriers. So for every BSL, these points will be like applicable. Coming to the standard microbiological practices, this is very important. Like irrespective of the BSL, like how we tell, irrespective of the infectious condition of the patient, everyone working in the hospital needs to follow standard precaution. You cannot tell, I will not follow standard precaution because the patient is not HIV positive or hepatitis B positive or open case of tuberculosis. No. Irrespective of any patient entering into the hospital, standard precautions are mandatory. Similarly, irrespective of the any biological safety laboratory containment, standard microbiological practices are mandatory. You cannot tell I'm working in BSL1, so this is not required. No. Because it are the basic things which we required, where the restricted entry with a biohazard sign, with a proper hand wash area, all pipetting should be avoided, no eating and drinking, safe handling of the shops, and decontamination of the surfaces, the biomedical waste segregation, and the pest control. I think even the smallest of the labs need to follow all these things. These are all the standard practices which has to be followed. Now coming to the special practices for the BSL1, as such, there is no. And the safety requirement, there is no need for the biosafety cabinet here, but personal protective equipments and the protective eyewear is required. Whenever you are dealing with the material, infectious material, the personal protective equipment like including your gloves, your mask, and your face shield or your eye cover, and the gown if it is required. Based on the type of microorganisms you are dealing with, based on the type of the work you are performing on that particular sample, you are going to define and decide what type of PPE and what type of biosafety level containment I am going to require. See, what all I am telling about the BSL 1, 2, 3, 4, it varies. It changes from organism to organism. It changes from the type of work you are going to perform with that. The diagnostic, totally different type of containment. When I'm talking about the cultures, it is totally different type of the containment. Though the organism will be same, but because the type of work has been changed, so the biosafety level containment will also change. So it is not fixed to the particular organism. As Dr. Aruna told in the previous presentation, it depends on the type of risk assessment you do. It depends on the type of biorisk assessment. Biorisk is associated with a particular organism and the biosecurity associated with that particular organism. You are going to define your BSL levels. So coming to the laboratory facilities, secondary barriers, doors for access control, and the bench top should be impervious. It should be impervious to the liquids, and the laboratory furniture should be kept apart. Many times it happens that the laboratories are very congested. They keep the one furniture over the other. So what happened when we try to clean the surfaces, many of the surfaces and the crevices have been left behind and the proper cleaning will not be done. And that could be a source of contamination and cross-contamination and infection to the laboratory healthcare worker. Now coming to the biosafety level 1, this is the normal one which we see in the laboratories, which has an airflow from here, and if it goes from this planum, it goes out. It's a unidirectional flow of air without any HEPA filters in that. Coming to the question that level 1 are all the requirements are all except.
So we can have a poll here, just opinion poll here from the participants. So
Please go
this is, we have just published the poll. You can respond the options given here. For biosafety level 1, all are correct except. Yeah, I see response is coming up,
Yeah.
and very diverse response is coming up. Those of you who could not see the poll option, just see below the menu, below the screen, there are options to respond. Next 10 seconds, then we will publish the poll result. Dr. Mustafa, are you able to see the result?
Yes,
Poll?
yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm ending the poll now, and then possibly you can do comments on this response from the participants.
Sure.
Yes. So poll is closed. Now the 69% response is towards the special practices, 12% for laboratory facilities, 11% for a standard macrobiological practice, and 6% for safety equipment primary barriers requires biosafety cabinet. What is the right answer?
See, in this biosafety level 1, just now I spoke, the standard microbiological practices are applicable irrespective of the level 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is not a correct answer. The special practices are not needed. This is the right answer. And also the safety equipment, like it doesn't require any biosafety cabinet in BSL level 1. So both B and C answers are correct and not the A and the D.
Okay, great. So you can go ahead with this presentation.
Yeah. Now, if you see onto the next slide, if you move, we have biosafety level 2 for the risk group organisms 2. Again, as we have discussed in the previous slides, risk group 2 are those organisms which can pose moderate and potential hazard to the community and the environment. So what are the things required in BSL2? We'll see one by one. These laboratory personnel have a specific training in handling the pathogen. If you see, just compare with the BSL1, I didn't speak much about the training procedures there. They require training in BSL1 also, but the specific training related to the handling of the pathogenic agents or the infectious material is needed in BSL2. Access to the laboratory should be limited, and extreme precautions are to be taken with the sharp atoms. In this point, I would like to just tell one point here at now the recent WHO upgraded guidelines are they have replaced all the sharp atoms with the glass and all that with the plastic items. So the good thing is that the significant amount of injury due to sharp atoms have come down because most of the plastic items have been reused and disposed of. It is meant for a single use, and the sharpness will not be so much as we have with the glasses and other sharp objects. Certain procedures like infectious aerosols or splashes may be created while we are doing this work. This type of works have to be done in biological safety cabinet. So these are all the extra points we are saying in BSL2. Apart from that, standard microbiological practices, as I discussed, it also here in the BSL2, special practices, standard operative procedures. See, just one small thing I want to add here. Many of the labs are going for now coronavirus processing in the lab, right? They are going for the RT-PCR, they are going for CBNAT, they are going for the STRONAT, all these methodologies, and they are asking what type of laboratory is required here. So mostly, if you ask me, they have a proper biosafety cabinet, BSL2, plus or minus BSL3 if your viral propagation or cultures have been done. They are going for ICMR approval. They are going for enable accreditation. What this enable wants from this is the level 4 documents. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, they require a quality system manual. They should develop the policies in the lab, what type of things they are going to do. And then they need to have quality system procedure. Then they have standard operative procedures and the level 4 document, which implies your flow charts and your traceability certificates and all. So if your lab is going for this coronavirus RT-PCR, BSL2 is required with all 4 documents: quality system manual, quality system procedure, standard operative procedures, and level 4 document for the flow charts and traceabilities and all. And apart from that, they may require EQAS, external quality assurance programs. They may require IEL, interlaboratory proficiency programs, and many other things are there. The IQC, CV percentage, and LG charts and all. We will not go much into this detail, but this is very important here. Coming to that again, the biohazard signs we have seen in BSL1, appropriate information to be posted. This is differs here again. In BSL2 lab, we need to name the name of the agent which we are processing and what type of biosafety level we are following, the immunization of the workers, investigation name and the telephone number with proper personal protective equipment is further added in BSL2. Apart from that, annual trainings for the sharp handling, biomedical waste segregation, spills and accident records have to be maintained. One more point I would like to add here is that biomedical waste segregation, as per the COVID, they have modified little modification where the waste has to be treated before it is being discarded, especially the infectious waste. And apart from that, the disinfectant. The approval of the disinfectant, selection of the disinfectant is very important. Whenever you are selecting any disinfectant, don't copy the policies and procedures from other lab. See what type of agents you are having, biological agents you have in the lab, whether this disinfectant acts on my lab, whether it is a virucidal, it kills the virus or it inactivates the virus, and what type of concentration is needed, what is the manufacturer's recommendation for that concentration, and what is the contact time required. All these three things are important, and this can only be done when you have a proper monitoring of this your housekeeping staff or your nursing staff. Otherwise, have seen in many labs where they just use the disinfectant for the name purpose. Now coming to the safety equipment barriers, yes, definitely BSL2 labs needs biosafety class 2 for aerosol generating procedure, and full PPE is required with face shield, and laboratory facilities in the secondary barriers, restricted entry, hand wash facilities again as in BSL1, bench top should be impervious to the liquids, biosafety cabinet, eye wash station is required, but there is no specific ventilation required. In BSL2, I'm going to discuss when the ventilation requirement is there. I'm going to talk in my subsequent slides. So now coming to the biosafety 2, the continuation there I have different types, type A1, A2 and B1, B2. It differs from class 1 by allowing only air from the HEPA filters. But into the class A2, B1 and B2, it is passed through the HEPA filters. What are the difference between A1, A2, B1, B2 and it has to be used? I will discuss other slides. So this is the class 2 biosafety cabinet where you have the entry of air through this, and here you have a grill. From there it goes through the plenum, it goes up. Here you have an exhaust HEPA filter, and here you have the working HEPA filter from where air falls into the workstation. And this is how the direction of air goes like this. It comes from here and it goes through the plenum. It goes here, 30% will get exhaust, 70% will get recirculated, and it passes through these HEPA filters and it falls onto the workstation. But it will not allow the person who's working or sitting here to get cross-contaminated or infected with this air. This is again the B1, the biosafety cabinet. Again here, the extra thing which you are seeing here is the HEPA filter here. If you go back and see into the previous slide, the HEPA filter was not here. Here the air was entering from the surfaces where the healthcare worker is sitting, and it is passing through this blower, and it goes in through the plenum, and again 30% exhaust through the exhaust HEPA filter, and again 70% falling into the bench work area through the HEPA filters. But if you see into this, here you have an HEPA filter where even the air enters here also pass through the HEPA filters, again through the blower, and here the plenum you have is a negative pressure plenum. It sucks the air from here in the blower and the outside air. Once it passes through the HEPA filters, 30% will get exhausted, 70% again falls into the workstation area or worktop area. This again details I'll show you in the next slide. If you see here, before we go into the details of that, just we'll finish the biosafety level 3, then we'll see what is the difference of 3 cabinets. Biosafety level 3 is applicable to clinical, diagnostic and teaching research facilities, and it is done with again the work done here is with an exotic agents which may cause a serious or lethal potential complications to the worker through inhalation. Again here if you see, the standard microbiological practices is required as BSL2 and BSL1. Special practices, again what you are going to have is develop the biosafety manual and SOPs. This is very important, as we have discussed in BSL2 just now. It overlaps here with the BSL2, BSL3 and BSL4, where whatever lab you are keeping, few points you need to keep. How are you going to design the lab? Where are you going to place the lab? Whether it will be in the public or away from the public. Whether it will be in the hospital or away from the hospital. And what type of biomedical discard it requires. The biomedical waste has to be treated or not. And many things are there. These are all has to be documented in your manual. These are the policies which has been given by the top management, and based on that, you will plan your quality system manual, quality system procedure, standard operative procedure, and level 4 document. And here in the BSL3, the control access should be there with a biohazard sign. Immunization of the work is very important. Annual trainings and updates, restricted usage of sharps and extra precautions for the sharps, and all the work has to be done in biosafety cabinet only. No work will be allowed to do on the bench surfaces or workbench area. And the spill and accident register has to be maintained, and treating of biomedical waste before we are discarding it and decontamination with the proper disinfectant is needed for the special practices. If you see now, the next question which comes is, which of the following practices should be utilized when working with a biological safety cabinet? Mr. Pranav?
Yeah, we can wait for the response. Poll is already active. I request participants to start responding now. Yeah, response is coming up. And it looks response is very clear. All participants are very clear almost.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I think give just 10 seconds more, because I see the graph is moving from 100%, now it is 97%. Okay. Yeah, I think the Vishal Gaikwad and all of you who are trying to put answer in the chat box, just you can see the whole menu at the bottom. Through that you can respond so that it get captured along with everybody's response. So I'm ending the poll now, and you can see the response is 97% people say all the above.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent, Mr. Pranam. I think this is the right time to freeze that also. Most of them are very clear that the biosafety cabinet should be very free from all these things, because just now we have seen how the air direction flows in the biosafety cabinet. So if I store anything on the biosafety cabinet, I'm going to block my airways and it is not going to work properly. Excellent. We'll move to the next slide quickly. So the safety equipments what we require is biosafety class 2 or 3 with full PP and respirators should be worn. Whenever we are working with any pathogen which can generate aerosols, always make sure that the respirators shall be worn, a 95 mask, such type of things, so that the airborne transmission of infections can be prevented. Laboratory facilities, secondary barriers, again the restricted entry, passage through a series of 2 self-closing doors is the basic requirement for entry into the laboratory from access corner doors. So BSL3, we require to have the double door entries and hand wash and biosafety cabinet to be placed away from the doors. See, whenever we are placing any biosafety cabinet in the laboratory, make sure that the biosafety cabinet should not be in a place where highest air current flow or the changes of airflow is there. It should not be near doors. It should not be near windows where you are supposed to have a highest flow of air, and that will disrupt the air flow directions in the biosafety cabinet. So always make sure that it should be away from the doors and the windows, and the eye wash stations has to be there. Now coming to the interior surfaces of the wall floors, it should be impervious, and the wall, ceiling and floor should be impermeable to the liquids, chemicals, disinfectants. This is for the BSL3. Apart from that, the ducted exhaust air ventilation system is provided, and there should be a unidirectional flow of air from a clear part to a contaminated part, and the outside exhaust must be HEPA filtered, and the consideration should be given to installing an HVAC, heating ventilation air conditioning system control to prevent positive pressurization of the laboratory. See that there is no complication here. The BSL3 lab, whenever we are talking about, please keep in mind you need to have biosafety level cabinet type 2A or type 2B. Okay, and second thing you are going to keep in the mind is the unidirectional flow of air, and the exhaust air has to be HEPA filtered. And whenever you are doing any procedures, aerosol generating procedures, they need to have an heating ventilation HVAC control system to avoid the infections. And audible alarm should be considered to notify the personnel of HVAC system failure, heating ventilation air conditioning system failure, and HEPA filtered exhaust air from class 2 biological safety cabinet. So whatever is there in the BSL3 is, one, the unidirectional airflow. Second, the exhaust should not be recirculated. If it is being recirculated, it has to pass through the HEPA filters. And if it is better if you can have an HVAC system plus or minus in BSL3 lab, depending on the type of work we do. And there should be, all the exhaust air has to be HEPA filtered before it is being dispersed into the outside environment. Okay, and also there should be a continuous flow. The equipment should not generate aerosols, because if it is being generated, then it should pass through the HEPA filters. Autoclave should be there for the decontamination of the contaminated waste. If you have seen in the BSL 1 and 2, where the autoclave is not there inside the lab, but in the 3, it has to be there inside the lab, with the backflow precaution devices must be fitted, so that the backflow should not be there, and the vacuum pumps should be properly protected with traps and filters. And the facility must be used for the verification, design, and the operational parameters for the biosafety cabinet. There should be a validation of the HEPA filters in the biosafety cabinet. There should be an annual maintenance check for the biological safety cabinet, and there should be an AMC for your HVAC system if you are using the ducts in the laboratories. This is how it goes, where you have the two airlock drive doors here, 2 doors, and from where unidirectional flow of air from here to the outside. The workflow is a very clear space station here, and the proper autoclave inside the laboratory, the biological safety cabinet, and the exhaust being connected to the HEPA filters before it is going outside, and if plus or minus HVAC system constitute the BSL-3 lab. This is again the cabinet. We are class 2 biosafety cabinet here. Again we are using. This is the difference between the different cabinets in the class 1, class 2, class 3. If you see the class 1, 100% exhaust is there and it is connected to the hard deck. Class A1, it has 70% recirculated, 30% exhaust. Again, it is exhausted to the room. Same room, if it is passing to the exhausted air is coming back to the lab, it has to pass through the HEPA filters, or it can be connected outside. Class A, the air circulation requirement is almost same, but the velocity with which the air enters the cabinet is 0.38 to 0.51, whereas in class A2 it is 0.51. Otherwise, most of the things are similar. Class 2 B1, if you see here, it is an opposite of this. Recirculation is only 30%. 70% is exhausted through the hard deck. It passes through the HEPA filters. Class B2, again, the air is same almost. There is no recirculation at all. If you see the recirculation, it is 0. Most of the air is exhausted. 100% it is exhausted. And class B2, type 2B, again 100% exhausted. So this is how the class 1 different biosafety cabinet differs in the biosafety classes: class 1, class 2, A1, A2, B, B1, B2, and class 3 cabinets. Coming to the BSL-4 laboratory, I think this is the laboratory where we have never worked, to be honest. I'm also never worked in this type of laboratories. It is a most complex laboratory with the highest containment level. It requires everything here along with a BSL-3 requirement. BSL-3 requirement, in short summary, I told: biosafety cabinet type 2A or type 2B with HVAC system plus or minus, autoclave inside the laboratory, unidirectional flow of air, and double door entry. Extra apart from that, in BSL-4, we need to have a primary containment, controlled access, control air system is an extra thing here. Decontamination of the effluents is an extra thing here. Sterilization of waste is same as in BSL-3. Airlock entry ports are an extra thing here, and emergency power and containment drains. So these are all the extra parts which are. If you see here, it has 2 types. Primary containment is through 2 types. One is through class 3 cabinet laboratory, another through suit laboratory. We will see in biology level, again there are 2 types. One is through class 3 laboratory, cabinet laboratory, another is through suit laboratory. How it differs, we will see in the slide, subsequent slide. If you see the primary containment in class 3 cabinet laboratory, passage is through the minimum of 2 doors, entering into the containment containing class 3 biosafety cabinet. So in class 3 cabinet laboratory, we have class 3 biosafety cabinet. I've shown you just now the class 3 biosafety cabinet. If you see here, this one, the class 3 biosafety cabinet, where you have a glove port where you extend your arm with the gloves and you process. It is totally closed. It is a biosafety 3, where there is no recirculation, 100% exhaust, and hands can be entered only through the port. This is what we use in BSL-4. If you are talking about the cabinet system in BSL-4, I'll show you here. A personal shower with inner and outer changing room is necessary. This is important. Supplies and materials should be through double door autoclave. And once the outer door is securely closed, then the inside door will open unless it passes the UV light. And the doors of the autoclave or fumigation chamber are interlocked. So these are the extra requirement, I would say, in L4, where the double door prior to entry, safety level 3 is needed, and personal shower is needed, and supply through the airlock double door autoclave, and also the door of the autoclaves and the fumigation chambers are interlocked. Apart from that, if you see in the suit laboratory, this is another type of BSL-4 laboratory where you require protective suit laboratory with self-contained breathing apparatus. It differs significantly from class 4 biosafety cabinet 3. How? It does not need BSL-3 cabinetry because here the person itself will wear breathing apparatus, HEPA filtered one. The rooms in the protective suit laboratory, changing and decontamination areas should be there prior we enter into the infectious material area, and suit decontamination shower is provided. So in suit laboratory, extra thing we need is suit decontamination shower. If you see in cabinet 3 in BSL-4, they require only personal shower, but in suit laboratory we require decontamination shower apart from personal shower, and there should be a separate personal shower apart from the decontaminate shower for inner and outer changing. Person who enters the suit area required to done. This is how it differs. Positive pressure HEPA filtered supply air suit. This is what the difference between BSL-4 cabinet 3, BSL-4 suit cabinet. Suit cabinet doesn't require biosafety cabinet 3. It requires HEPA filtered supplied air suit, an appropriate warning system so that the suit laboratory must be provided in case of failure. And entry into the suit laboratory is through an airlock fitted airtight doors. An appropriate warning system should be there in the suit laboratory must be provided. If you see into the next slide, control access is required for both the thing, whether it is BSL-4 is through the your cabinet 3 or through the suit 1, it is a control access is required, and then control air system is required, both the one. But the class 3 cabinet, it requires the air to be drawn from the room. It has passed through the HEPA filters and directly throws through the system and 100% exhausted. And exhaust air has to pass through 2 HEPA filters, and dedicated non-recirculating ventilation system is required for the cabinet laboratory. So BSL-4 class 3 cabinet laboratory requires BSL class 3 biosafety cabinet 3 laboratory. Biosafety cabinet 3 type 3, and exhaust air has to pass through the 2 HEPA filters, and it should be operated in negative pressure. Remember this point for the class 3 cabinet laboratory, because in suit laboratory the requirement is totally different. We require only dedicated room air supply with the exhaust system, and with just now I told you the personal protective equipment with the positive pressure HEPA filters inside, and the unidirectional flow of air. Exhaust should be maintained to maintain negative pressures at all time, and differential pressure within the suit laboratory and the adjacent areas should be monitored, because all the BSL-4 labs, whether it is cabinet 3 or suit laboratory, it should be negative pressure, and airflow should be in a same direction, similar direction. It has to pass through HEPA filters again. HEPA filtered supply air and HEPA filtered exhaust, both are HEPA filtered, both the supply air and the exhaust, and all the HEPA filters needs to be tested and certified, as just now we have discussed. So this is the difference between the class 3 cabinet and suit laboratory, and all requires gaseous decontamination. We have seen in many labs, I don't want to elaborate here, air handling units are left like that. There is no proper air handling unit. Ducts have been contaminated. HEPA filters have been used for more than 3 years. There was no validation of the HEPA filters. So these are all going to defeat the purpose what you are trying to create the atmosphere inside. So all these things are important. It has to be decontaminated, and these chemicals can be used for the decontamination of your laboratories. Mostly are high level disinfectants like hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, peracetic acid, and all this. So this is how the different types of microorganisms, these are very clear, biosafety level, risk group, and what type of biosafety level. It is there on the net. You can go through this. I think my time is going to over now. So this is very clear. Okay, what type of organisms I'm going to show you in the next slide. So these are all the biosafety level different. Chikungunya, Zika, Ebola, Nipah has to be done in BSL-4. All viral propagation work Viral culture work has to be done in BSL-3. Remaining all diagnostic works can be done in BSL-2. So these are all the organisms. Non-pathogenic strains of E. coli, Staphylococcus, Bacillus, and other organisms can be dealt in BSL Biosafety Laboratory 1. Biosafety Laboratory 2, hepatitis A, B, C, pathogenic strains of E. coli, Staph, Salmonella, Plasmodium, and all will come in BSL-2. And risk group organisms like HIV, hepatitis B, dengue, rabies comes in BSL-2. BSL-3, we have MERS, SARS-CoV, and human pathogenic Asian influenza virus, encephalitis, TB, Mycobacterium tuberculosis requires BSL-3, brucella, yellow fever, all these things comes in BSL-3. And BSL-4, we have exotic microorganisms where there is no proper treatment, there is no proper vaccination, and we are not very clear with this. Comes in BSL-4 like Nipah virus, Ebola, Marburg, Hantavirus, and Lassa. So these are all, in short, the different organisms and the biosafety levels. These are all the CDC list of bioterrorism. I think the speaker after me in the next week is going to speak in detail about the bioterrorism. But usually group A organisms are those which pose the highest risk, highest mortality, and the organisms are different. But before we conclude, these are all the biosafety levels: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Their laboratory types, what type of work practices can be done, and what safety precautions can be needed. So in short, biosafety level 2, good microbiological techniques, personal protective equipment, biosafety cabinet if performed generating procedure. Coming to BSL-3, it requires 2 plus controlled access, unidirectional airflow, and biosafety cabinet, and primary devices to control the infection. Coming to BSL-4, 3 plus, we need to have either the suite laboratory or we need to have a cabinet 3 laboratories, as we have discussed just now. So these are all the summary of the biosafety level precautions requirements. You can go through this, where it has the isolation of the laboratory, biosafety level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mostly, some of the things are overlapping, if you see here, based on the type of work which we do in different biosafety laboratories. But in short, it has given about the isolation laboratories, the room required, whether what type of airlock is required, or the autoclaves are required or not. This is in short, it gives a very clear-cut idea about the different types of laboratories which can use. So these are all the viruses. This is the CDC microorganisms which can be taken care. Group B organisms are those which can easily disseminate and cause morbidity. And the organisms includes are all this Coxella, Brucella, and Burkholderia, which will deal most of them. These are all can be used for bioterrorism. And CDC has classified into different types. Category A, which is highly dangerous. Category B, which can cause different infections to a moderate degree, which where the treatment and the vaccinations are available, as a Salmonella, Shigella, E. coli, and all. I think the next speaker will speak in detail about this. And the category C is again emerging pathogens, again which has a high morbidity. All this Nipah, tick-borne viruses, yellow fever, and can be used. So, in short, in conclusion, emerging viral threats, they have to be improved surveillance in the country, and the outbreak response should be quick. And this can only be done when the virus can be studied properly, epidemiology can be done, and the virus study can be done. And this can only be done when we have a proper biosafety level containments in the country. The key is to develop a biosafety program and develop a biorisk assessment and management by developing a good containment systems, and develop an implementation of laboratory biosafety principles is very important now. Looking like most of the hospitals are looking now forward for BSL-2 and BSL-3 because of the change in scenario of the infections outside. These are the people who fight at the border. We are the people who fight inside the border. But ultimately, the risk associated with both of them are almost same. And I think both deserves the proper dignity and support from everyone in the country. They have to respect the doctors, healthcare providers. They have kept their life in danger just to protect this from the emerging infections. And that too, the poor part of the story is that we are fighting with the virus where we doesn't know the proper details of that virus, the types of infection. Many doctors have been got infected and the family members infected. So these are all the references which we have taken. I've taken this manual, Laboratory Safety Manual, 3rd edition. It is a very good manual. It has been updated recently also. You can, 4th edition has come recently. You can study this. And any more questions you can ask. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa. As usual, so engrossing, so interesting, and so knowledgeable presentation. Especially a couple of points, which are like very, very important issues which you have brought to the fore. You talked about our colleagues getting affected within the laboratories and getting infected just because of either lack of infrastructure or lack of understanding or the knowledge about how to deal with the biosafety and how to take the precautions, right? And you have mentioned about some of those unfortunate colleagues who got infected either with TB or with Hep B, or probably some of those which have never come to the surface. So, one thing I definitely would like to, emphasize here that, these kind of sessions, not only you should be attending, but also you should sensitize all the people within the healthcare institution wherever you are working, in order to get knowledgeable about these matters, and also, to take the kind of expertise and also the benchmarkable practices what the speakers are giving in these sessions. One thing I remember, Dr. Peter was here from a London school last to last year. He was saying that we are safe in our laboratory and also in our health care institutions, um, as long as the last person in the given institution is safer, right? That means we being knowledgeable and we actually doing everything right is not sufficient. That we had to ensure that we are while we are practicing, while we are actually taking all the precautions, we also sensitize, train all the team so that everybody are going to follow the standard practices which are going to reduce the risk both in the laboratories but and also in other facilities within the healthcare institutions. That is one, I think, clear message I take home from here. And also, thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa, for taking the pain to go through all the, kind of guidelines by all the major organizations, whether it is WHO, CDC, European Union, etc., right? And, giving the classifications based on, various organizations who have published them. That is quite interesting. And also, giving a kind of detailed kind of information about the risk group classifications, and also giving very standard tips and also the best possible tips in order to protect ourselves, either it is sharp injuries, or or it is related to not wearing proper PPE, or getting into the practices which we know are dangerous, but still because of inertia, we do. Giving those kind of advices, practical advices and the tips, I'm sure they are going to make a lot of difference to the practitioners, to those who are working in the labs, those who are supporting the labs, and also those who are collecting the samples, who are transporting the samples, who are generally doing anything which is related to the all the microbiology and lab work. Thank you very much once again for that. Dr. Mustafa, before Mr. Pranav is going to actually bring to the fore some of the questions which are raised today by the colleagues, I would like to request your opinion. Now the government of India in May this year has come with a government order saying that all the medical colleges need to have at least a biosafety level 2 kind of lab, right? What is your opinion? And with such a lack of actually understanding, knowledge, and experience dealing with these labs, do you think it is safe? And if it is safe, if it is not safe, what had to be done in order to make these upcoming laboratories as a safer institutions? What is your call on that?
Sir, thank you, sir, for asking this very important question. The question asked was about that the medical laboratories have been instructed by government officials to have biosafety level laboratories in their institutions, right, sir?
Yes.
So, sir, I'll always tell in my presentation that we are learning swimming after, like we can only learn after falling onto the swimming pool. We cannot learn by just by sitting aside the swimming pool and saying that I will swim like this and that. The problem with our Indian Medical Council is they don't have the protocols and newer policies to fight with this emerging viral and emerging and re-emerging viral and bacterial infections. The same thing implies when we talk about the infection prevention and control, which has to be taught at the MBBS first year level, kindergarten level, in the MBBS graduation period, medical graduation period, it has been not done. Same things goes. I recommend, sir, all the medical colleges should be equipped with BSL-2 laboratories, and they should impose on the medical graduates the basic concept behind that. Otherwise, the same thing is going to happen, which has happened with my medical college. I'm very sad to share this. Everyone knows also, I think, most of my medical college PGs got infected with this infection, the pandemic, recent pandemic. Just because we were never been in a position or in a trained with advanced equipments or infrastructure to handle this infectious waste. So I strongly believe that this has to be incorporated at the graduation or post-graduation level before a person becomes a professionally qualified for so and so medical specialties. It has to be done at the PG level or at the medical level in the medical colleges. No doubt in that, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, for that comment. I probably would add here. I think, while the government is going to do at its own pace whatever it is going to do, probably we as a community of infection preventionists, I think we should come forward and devise, some kind of special training program for those colleagues, who are going to work in these newly set up laboratories. And probably, we train them to that level, which is going to bring actually the safety for those who are going to work in those laboratories, but also those, who are going to surround them and those institutions where these laboratories are located.
Yes.
Probably, we will come out with a special training program for those novices. If you agree on that, probably others, who are in this training program, who are watching, and those, who are having already enough expertise, they can also join in this endeavor in order to bring that program together. Mr. Pranav, probably, there are multiple questions which are shot by the participants. Maybe, you could pose some of them to Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, sure. We have a couple of questions here. So I just starting randomly. So two people asked the similar questions. So I'm clubbing that. Dr. Abhiram Sundari and there's another senior microbiologist asked about the HEPA. So HEPA filters once in how many months it should be changed, and besides periodicity, what is the minimum rationale for changing the HEPA filters?
See, for the question asked is that filters, how frequently it has to be validated or changed, and how frequently it has to be taken care for the AMC and the preventive maintenance and all. See, as per the guidelines, if you see, sir, it depends on the type of work you are doing. HEPA filters for the operation theater, it is totally different. HEPA filters for the containment laboratories, it is totally different. Like if you ask for the operation theaters for both super specialty and specialty operation theater, HEPA filters has to be every 6 months. It has to be validated every 3 months. It has to be checked for its patterns and the particulate deposited inside that. Every year it has to be changed, validated every 6 months they can validate, and every year it has to be changed for super specialty and specialty OT. When coming to the containment laboratories, especially like BSL-3 and BSL-4, where if you see basically these laboratories are not made in the public places. They are not made in the places where the high flow of the public is there. Usually it has been made away from common places. But still what I recommend, it has to be validated every 6 months and it has to be changed every yearly. And one important point I would like to say here is that removing of HEPA filter is a very, very contagious act. It can spread infection like anything. It has to be done in air sealed or gas sealed containers. There is a separate procedure to discard and remove the HEPA filters, especially from the containment laboratories. It cannot be removed simply like how it's been removed in other places. Because this is considered to be highly infectious, it has to be removed in a very airtight and gas sealed containers, and it has immediately to be discarded. And to be, if you go by the guidelines, every 6 months validation has to be done, and yearly they can remove, and in between they can have the preventive maintenance from the laboratory every month.
The next question we have in biosafety cabinet, Dr. Deepa is asking, what are air velocity, filter integrity, and particle count regarding required for calibration of biosafety cabinet?
This biosafety cabinet requirements from biosafety level 2 starts, 2, 3, and 4. It is different from each side. If you see the 0.58 meters per second velocity of air is trapped in biosafety level 2. In biosafety level type 2B, the same velocity is there, but it is subbed with a negative pressure inside. So the particulate air count, there is a different formula for to calculate, and there are different standards. It goes for the environmental norms. The environmental policy is there, EN policy is there. Based on that, the particulate count, air velocity, and the airflow can be done. Usually, it is being done by a technical person who deals with this maintenance and give AMC and preventive maintenance of the biosafety cabinet. It differs from the cabinet to cabinet.
Okay. Another question we have, very, very good question actually, by Dr. Alka Singh. She is asking, what are the immunization required for the personnel working with biosafety cabinet?
This is a very good question actually. This is where we deal daily as a part of infection preventionist. See, there are a number of protocols for this vaccination, especially for those who are working in the biosafety level 4. There are work ethics, work practices ethics are there, where single person should not work in BSL 4 lab. Always there should be a 2 person, and there should be person should be aware and trained in emergency extraction. Person should be aware in communicating inside the BSL 4 with those outside the BSL 4. There are some work ethics. In that, immunization is also one of that, where basic vaccination available like tetanus, toxoid, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, influenza viruses. These are all the vaccinations which are required. Even meningoencephalitis, when they are dealing with this type of viruses. There are some basic vaccination protocols, as I said just now. Apart from that, if the particular agent has been worked in the BSL-4, like they are working in Western encephalitis, so if there is an availability of serum or immunoglobulins, it can be taken. But basically, they have to cover with all the WHO immunization protocols that it has for hepatitis B and hepatitis A and tetanus toxoid, influenza viruses, meningococcal vaccines, are all this the basic requirement. And the healthcare workers should have a card in his play card where it has been vaccinated. It has to be returned, his name with the photo. And apart from that, if they are working with a particular agent, if that particular vaccination is available, they have to take as an extra thing in that.
I will take the last question of this day from Nishar Ahmed. What is the success rate of biosafety cabinet for COVID-19 containment in hospital setting?
Biosafety level containment in hospital requires BSL-2 minimum requirement with a biosafety cabinet type 2A-B or type 2A. As long as you have a good infrastructure, unidirectional flow of air, proper changing rooms and your processing areas with good HEPA filters and negative pressure in the amplification rooms, and proper your changing and showering room once you exit, the safety is almost touching the 98 to 99%. Whenever there is a breach in the protocol in the sense not only related to wearing of personal protective equipment, it is related to the training of the individual in handling the infectious material. It is related to training of handling of biomedical waste. It is related to training of infrastructural arrangement, HVACs, HEPA filters, negative pressures, and it is also related to the good equipments in the laboratories. All these things are important. Suppose if I have everything, but my equipment biosafety cabinet is not been validated, totally blocked, and not working at all, not generating any negative pressure, then again I will be in a risk of having the infection. So everything is important. If you ask me, the risk is associated not only with the man, but also with the infrastructure, but also with the equipment. All three are important.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Actually, the type of comments you see in the chat box, it is a fabulous presentation, very, very comprehensive. Thank you very much for this. All the participants who joined this as well as who registered for the program will get a mail. The mail will have not only the presentation, rather the video recording of the session. As and when you have time, you can go through. I also request you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is sanmed.live/YT. Once you subscribe, then as soon as the video getting uploaded, you will get notification and you can see those video. You can see even the previous season IPC Masterclass once video there also. So I strongly recommend you to please subscribe the YouTube channel sanmed.live/YT. Further, a small clarification here. Those people who are registering for this series, there is an options to register for all the sessions. So you have to tick mark, choose that also, so that you get registered for all the remaining 3 also sessions. Once it is done, then you not need to register again. Then automatically you will get a mail, a previous day first mail at 3 o'clock, and 15 minutes before the scheduled time of this webinar, another mail goes to you with the link. We try to send SMS also to Indian participants from here, so that you can click in one click, you can join that. If you have not registered for that particular session, then you will be required to again register to get the link to join that. With this final comments with the President, Dr. Rangareddy.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Those of you who have joined from all over the world, from Australia to Dubai to Saudi Arabia to Cambodia to United States, to all of you, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this session. Please do send your comments. Please do send your suggestions so that we can continuously improve what is going to be delivered. And taking this opportunity, I would like to invite for the next session, which is going to be on June 23rd at the same time from 3 to 4. And the next session is going to be delivered by Dr. N. Savita. And we are going to talk about biosafety violation and bioterrorism. I am sure it is going to be equally interesting, and look forward to see you all on June 23rd. Till then, stay safe and stay alive. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.